A series on understanding Putin and the war in Ukraine. On October 25, 2003, at an airport in Novosibirsk, a private jet belonging to the Yukos Oil Company had just landed when a squad of heavily armed FSB agents stormed the cabin. They arrested Mikhail Khodorkovsky, then the richest man in Russia, on the spot. This dramatic scene was broadcast across Russia and the world at lightning speed. This was no ordinary law enforcement action. This was the final battle in the war between Putin and the old oligarchs. In our last episode, we discussed how many of the oligarchs openly defied Putin's warning to stay out of politics. Yet when the dust settled, Putin had swept away their political influence as if they were nothing. How was it that these men, the masters of the country who could manipulate presidential elections, were so utterly powerless against him? The war on the oligarchs was not a simple redistribution of wealth. It was a complete and total reclamation of power, aimed at reversing the political order of the 1990s. In the story of modern Russia, oligarch is a core concept, but its true meaning is far more complex than just rich Russian businessman. The Russian oligarchs were a unique product of a specific historical moment. Their wealth was born from the chaotic and controversial privatization wave of the 90s. But wealth was just the foundation of their power. The essential difference between an oligarch and a mere billionaire is that an oligarch relentlessly converts economic power into political control. In the 90s, the oligarchs controlled the national television networks, shaping public opinion and influencing elections. They were the kingmakers in the Kremlin, directly intervening in the appointment of prime ministers and cabinet members. They saw themselves as the creators of the new state and believed that state power should serve their business interests. In essence, the Russian oligarchs were a small group of financial titans who had seized control of the country's political, media, and legal systems. They weren't businessmen playing by the state's rules. They were the ones trying to write the rules. Therefore, the moment Putin decided he wanted to be the real president of Russia, his war with the oligarchs became inevitable. After the Kursk disaster, Putin's purge of the oligarchs kicked into high gear, targeting those who refused to play by his new rules. The first to go were the media oligarchs who had been so vocal during the crisis. On Putin's orders, the Prosecutor General's office launched a fraud investigation into Vladimir Gusinsky. Through a series of maneuvers, Gusinsky not only ended up in jail, but his core asset, the NTV television network, was taken over by the state-owned gas company, Gazprom.
Another media tycoon, Boris Berezovsky, didn't escape either. He was hit with embezzlement charges. Under sustained pressure from law enforcement, he was forced to give up his control of the state's flagship Channel 1, and by the end of 2000, fled into exile in the UK. In just over a year, Putin had used the legal system to seize complete control of the nation's media landscape. This victory stunned the remaining oligarchs. More and more of them chose to submit to Putin's authority. But one man still chose to fight back: Mikhail Khodorkovsky. As the richest man in Russia and the head of the Yukos Oil Company, Khodorkovsky refused to give up his political influence and openly crossed every one of Putin's red lines. He systematically funded multiple opposition parties. He publicly challenged Putin on corruption in a televised meeting. And, most fatally, it was reported that he was in deep negotiations with American oil giants ExxonMobil and Chevron to sell a large stake in Yukos in exchange for their political backing. In Putin's eyes, this brazen act of selling out the country was the justification he needed to bring the hammer down. In July 2003, Khodorkovsky's business partner was arrested. 3 months later, Khodorkovsky himself was seized at the Novosibirsk airport. Then, Russian tax authorities hit Yukos with a staggering $27 billion tax bill, a fine far beyond the company's ability to pay, designed for the sole purpose of bankrupting it and forcing a transfer of control. In December 2004, Yukos's core subsidiary was auctioned off. The buyer was a shell company registered at the address of a small convenience store, which purchased the asset for $9.4 billion. A few days later, that shell company was acquired in its entirety by the state-owned oil company Rosneft. Khodorkovsky was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The message was clear. In the face of Putin's ruthless tactics, even the richest man in Russia was powerless. The rest of the Yeltsin-era oligarchs saw the writing on the wall and fell in line. The savviest of them all, Roman Abramovich, proactively sold his oil company to the state for $13 billion in 2005. The last of the old guard became extremely low profile, never again uttering a public word about politics. Putin's war on the oligarchs was a one-sided victory. They put up almost no effective resistance before being completely domesticated. He was able to achieve this not just because of his cunning tactics, but more importantly, because he skillfully mobilized an overwhelming coalition of forces against them. The foundation of his success was broad public support. In the eyes of most Russians, the oligarchs' vast fortunes came not from business acumen, but from the blatant looting of state assets. So when Putin went after them in the name of fighting economic crime and collecting back taxes, his actions were seen by the public as a restoration of social justice. The ironclad guarantee of his success was his firm grip on the state's core instruments of power. Unlike the oligarchs, whose power was based on money and media, the loyalty of Russia's
security agencies, the Siloviki, to Putin was absolute. The Prosecutor General's office initiated the lawsuits, the FSB handled investigations and arrests, the tax authorities launched the financial assault, and the judicial system ensured the desired verdict. In the Yukos case, this machine worked with brutal efficiency. The oligarchs' business empires were no match for this systematic attack. The Siloviki were so loyal to Putin for both historical and practical reasons. First, Putin himself was a product of the KGB. He shared a worldview and value system with the elites of the security services. For them, the 90s were a chaotic period of national humiliation when their status had plummeted. Putin's rise represented their best chance to take back power from the oligarchs and the Democrats. After becoming president, Putin not only restored their authority and budgets, but also placed a large number of his former colleagues from the security services into key positions in the government and state-owned enterprises. Their power and wealth were completely dependent on the new order Putin had built. Therefore, their loyalty to Putin was simply a defense of their own interests. In essence, the war on the oligarchs was a power struggle in which Russia's security establishment reclaimed national sovereignty and control of the economy from the financial elites. But there was another reason the oligarchs surrendered so easily. Putin's war was a bit of a misnomer. He had no intention of actually eliminating the oligarch class. Putin's war was about domestication, not extermination. He wanted to destroy their uncontrollable political power, not their control over the economy. As the disobedient oligarchs were put on trial, the vacuum was quickly filled by members of the security services and Putin's inner circle. The wealth of these new oligarchs came directly from their personal relationship with Putin himself. Before the 2022 war, this new group included figures like Gennady Timchenko, an old friend from Putin's St. Petersburg days who now controls energy giants. The Rotenberg brothers, his childhood judo partners, whose companies monopolize Russia's most important infrastructure projects. And Yuri Kovalchuk, a close confidant whose bank is considered Putin's personal piggy bank, and whose media group guards the gates of public opinion for him. So while the economy is still controlled by a small group of individuals, and the oligarchs never truly disappeared, the underlying logic of their existence has completely changed. In the 90s, oligarchic capital controlled the Russian state. In the Putin era, the oligarchs have become a political tool that he controls. The new oligarchs are an extension of his power system into the economic sphere. Their wealth is a product of their political loyalty, not a license to intervene in politics.
Back around 2007, when Putin had finished his purge of the old oligarchs, his power had been consolidated to an unprecedented degree. An all-powerful czar had once again appeared in Russia. But for the United States, Putin's total victory meant that the superficial honeymoon period between the two countries was about to end to a definitive end.